Imagine an air so thick you drink it. A wall of heat that hits you at 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Fahrenheit, the moment you open your eyes. The humidity clings at 95%, a wet blanket wrapping your lungs. This isn't just heat, it's a physical weight. A sauna the size of a continent, stretching for 2.1 million square miles. The Amazon rainforest. For you, a visitor, this environment is a hostile force. Every breath feels labored. Every movement, a negotiation with an atmosphere that wants to slow you down, to sap your strength. Now, step off the path, if you can find one. The jungle floor is a tangled mess of roots, vines, and decaying matter. Visibility drops to a few meters. The canopy 50 meters above blocks out the sun, casting the world in a perpetual, oppressive green twilight. You are not just hot, you are lost, disoriented. The sounds are a constant, deafening orchestra of insects, birds, and distant animal calls that offer no comfort, only a reminder of how many eyes are watching you. You begin to walk. The mud sucks at your boots, thorns tear at your clothes. The effort to move a single kilometer in this maze would drain the energy you'd use for 10 on open ground. This is the immediate challenge, the physical gauntlet. But for the indigenous tribes who call this place home, the Yanomami, the Kayapo, the Matses, this extreme environment was merely the stage, the opening act. Surviving the heat, the terrain, the sheer exhausting effort of existence here, that was the baseline, the expected. If you stopped there, you'd see them as merely resilient, tough, able to endure what would break an outsider in days. That's where you'd be wrong, because mastering the jungle's physical test was just the prerequisite. The real threat, the silent killer that has felled countless explorers, armies, and settlers, wasn't the anaconda or the jaguar. It wasn't dehydration or hunger, not immediately. It was something invisible, a biological ambush waiting in the water, in the soil, in the very air you struggled to breathe. After the monumental effort of travel, of building shelter, of finding food, your body, already pushed to its limit, would face its true enemy: disease. 1 million pathogens in a single drop of river water, parasites burrowing through skin, mosquitoes carrying malaria, dengue, yellow fever, fungal infections blooming in the constant damp. In this microbial paradise, a simple cut could fester into a life-threatening wound in hours. For any conventional approach, for any group that tried to conquer the jungle through grit alone, this was the inevitable end. The complication that followed the initial struggle, the jungle's ultimate defense system. So how did they not just survive but thrive for millennia? How did human communities establish permanent camps, raise children, and build complex cultures in what medicine calls a hyper-endemic zone for infectious disease? Why did European colonists, with their advanced technology, perish by the thousands from illness while these tribes lived on? And what if their survival wasn't despite the jungle's deadliest threat, but was intimately, strategically tied to it? This was not merely about being hardy or having herbal remedies. That's the superficial layer, the tourist brochure answer. This was about something far more profound. A living, breathing, biological defense system woven into the fabric of their daily existence. A form of collective immunity so advanced, it turned the jungle's greatest weapon into their shield. They didn't just walk through the green inferno. They had negotiated a truce with it at a cellular level, and the terms of that truce were written not in treaties, but in ritual, in routine, and in a relationship with the microbial world that modern science is only beginning to decipher. Think about that. While outsiders saw a landscape of death, they had architected an invisible fortress. The question is, how do you build a fortress out of the very thing that's trying to kill you? Forget the idea of a sterile bubble, of sealing themselves off. Their strategy was the opposite: Deliberate, managed, and constant exposure. This was the first layer of the system, the foundation. It began at birth. A newborn wasn't rushed into a secluded hut. It was integrated into the microbial landscape of the camp immediately, carried against skin teeming with a unique microbiome, gently introduced to the complex bacterial ecosystem of the mother, the family, the community. This wasn't negligence. It was the first, most critical immunization, a priming of the infant immune system with the specific pathogens it would need to recognize and manage for a lifetime. They weren't avoiding germs, they were curating them. Now, look at the camp itself, the Maloka, the large communal dwelling. Dozens, sometimes hundreds, living under a single roof. To an epidemiologist, this is a nightmare scenario. A perfect breeding ground for rapid, devastating disease transmission. And it was. But that was the point. This extreme proximity created a continuous low-level exchange of pathogens, a constant state of immunological alert. Your body was never at peace. It was always engaged, always training, like a soldier on permanent active guard duty. This meant that when a new, virulent strain entered the community, from a neighboring tribe, from an animal, the immune systems weren't caught sleeping. They were already mobilized. The response was faster, more targeted. The outbreak, if it happened at all, was contained and burned through the population with a swiftness that left the community stronger, not decimated. Then, the routine. The daily practices that seemed to an outsider like mere tradition or superstition. The specific way they processed manioc, leaching out the cyanide through days of soaking, washing, and heating. This wasn't just about removing poison. The fermentation process cultivated beneficial bacteria that colonized the gut, outcompeting dangerous invaders. Their food was medicine. Their bathing rituals in the river multiple times a day. This wasn't just for cleanliness. It was a systematic reset of the skin's microbiome, washing away harmful fungal spores while maintaining a healthy bacterial layer. A recalibration. Even their hunting patterns played a role. Moving camp seasonally, following game. This broke the cycle of parasites building up in the soil around their dwellings. They left before the concentration of hookworm or other soil-borne pathogens reached a critical mass. They weren't nomadic out of aimlessness. They were on a scheduled, strategic retreat from accumulating biological threats. But the system had a darker, more brutal layer. Its maintenance mechanism. It was sustained by a relentless natural selection, a harsh, unforgiving logic. Children who couldn't mount an effective immune response to the curated environment of the camp simply didn't survive infancy. It sounds cruel, inhuman, and it was. This was the system's terrible cost, paid in lives cut short. The community's collective immunity was forged in this furnace. The surviving population carried genetic and acquired resistances that made them, as a group, functionally adapted to their specific microbial world. This wasn't a gentle symbiosis. It was a hard-fought, constantly renegotiated armistice with death. The jungle provided the pathogens. Their lifestyle provided the relentless, grueling training ground. The result was a population that could drink water that would give a foreigner dysentery in hours. That could walk barefoot through soil crawling with parasites and not get infected. That hosted malaria parasites in their bloodstream at low, manageable levels, like a dormant engine always ready to ignite a defensive response. They had achieved something modern medicine struggles to replicate: herd immunity not through vaccines, but through lived experience. A dynamic, evolving biological defense, updated in real time by every interaction, every birth, every loss. The strategic result wasn't just survival, it was dominance over the disease landscape. It granted them a staggering advantage: predictability. While outsiders lived in terror of the invisible, they operated within a known spectrum of biological threats. They could plan, travel, wage war, raise families, not in spite of disease, but with a calculated understanding of its boundaries. The jungle's ultimate weapon had been mapped, its patterns learned, its edges defined. They turned the world's most potent biological weapon into a controlled burn. A fire they kept lit to ward off a much larger, uncontrollable wildfire. But a fortress, even an invisible one, has a gate, a point of vulnerability, and for this system, perfected over millennia, the gate was about to be blown wide open by something they could never have curated, never have trained for. A threat from a world their immune systems had never seen. The fortress held for thousands of years. Its walls were biological, its moat a river of managed pathogens. It was designed to withstand the known world. Every threat had a counterpart in their immune memory, a defensive protocol honed by generations. Then, the world changed. First contact, not with people initially, but with the microbes they carried. A Spanish conquistador's rusting armor in the 16th century, a rubber tapper's axe in the 19th, a missionary's Bible in the 20th. Each arrival was more than a cultural shock. It was a biological asteroid impact. Think of their immune system as a vast, meticulously organized library. Every pathogen they'd ever encountered, every strain of malaria, every intestinal parasite, every local virus had a file, a blueprint for a counterattack. It was a perfect system for their world. The newcomers brought books from a different library entirely. Titles written in a foreign code: influenza, measles, smallpox, the common cold. Diseases that had ravaged Europe and Asia for centuries, where populations had, through a similar brutal process of selection, developed their own grim resistances. Diseases to which the tribes had zero immunity, not low immunity, not partial resistance, zero. The result was not sickness, it was demolition. A single infected rubber tapper could walk into a region and, without ever meeting a tribe directly, leave behind a virus that would travel upriver through trade networks. It would hit a Maloka, that same communal dwelling that was the engine of their controlled exposure, and find not a trained militia, but a defenseless population. The very architecture of their survival became the architecture of their doom. Where a measles outbreak in a European city might kill 10% of affected children, in an Amazonian community it could wipe out 90% of the entire population. Not just the young or old, everyone. Villages that had weathered the jungle's worst for centuries were emptied in weeks. Silent. The only sounds returning were the insects and the rain on abandoned roofs. This was the catastrophic failure of a perfect system. Its strength became its absolute vulnerability. Their immunity was hyper-specialized, exquisitely tuned to a specific environment. It was a masterpiece of adaptation to a closed ecosystem. Introduce a variable from outside that system, and the masterpiece shattered. But the invasion wasn't just viral, it was chemical, spatial, fundamental. Missionaries and governments, seeing the devastation, tried to save them. They built permanent settlements, clinics. They distributed clothes, blankets, canned food. With the best of intentions, they began to systematically dismantle the very pillars of the biological fortress. Sedentary life meant parasites accumulated in the soil around the new permanent villages. The constant river bathing rituals faded with the introduction of Western modesty and different hygiene concepts. Processed foods replaced fermented manioc, gut microbiomes changed, weakened. Antibiotics, when available, wiped out both harmful and beneficial bacteria, leaving a blank slate more vulnerable to the next invader. The managed, curated exposure was replaced by a chaotic, unpredictable assault from foreign germs, combined with the decay of their own defensive routines. They were caught in a pincer movement, attacked from the outside by novel diseases and undermined from within by the erosion of their ancient practices. The cost was apocalyptic. Some estimates suggest up to 90% of the indigenous population of the Americas was killed by disease after 1492. In the Amazon, the waves of death continued into the 20th century, a slow-motion genocide written in fever and coughs. The insight here is terrifying. Their superior adaptation wasn't a universal shield. It was a specific deal with a specific devil. And when a new devil arrived, the old deal meant nothing. It reveals the true nature of their survival system. It wasn't about being invincible. It was about achieving a fragile, powerful equilibrium with a known set of threats, a state of dominance within a closed loop. Their strategy gave them supreme control over their known world, but made them exquisitely sensitive to the unknown. The jungle's heat, its predators, its terrain, these were never the real challenge. The real battle was always microscopic, and for millennia, they had won that battle on their own terms. Now, they were losing a war on terms they never agreed to, against enemies they had never met. The question that remains isn't about how they survive the jungle. It's about what happens when the jungle, as they knew it, ceases to exist, when the very concept of a closed loop is obliterated. What survives then? Is it the people, or is it the system? And can one exist without the other? So, where does that leave them? With a shattered system in a world that has violently forced its way in. The story doesn't end with collapse. It enters a new, more complex phase. A struggle not for survival against nature, but for sovereignty over a biological identity. Visit a modern indigenous village today. You'll see a jarring fusion, satellite dishes mounted on thatched roofs, hunters in traditional loincloths checking smartphones for weather updates, herbal remedies stored next to packets of antibiotics. This isn't a loss of culture. It's a front line, a living laboratory of adaptation under extreme duress. The old automatic system is gone. It can't be restored. The microbial world around them is now a globalized soup. But something critical remains: the knowledge, the deep intuitive understanding of the principle that saved them for millennia. You cannot hide from the microscopic world. You must engage with it, manage it, negotiate. See the young mother. She takes her child to the clinic for a WHO-approved vaccination against measles, a foreign blueprint injected into the body. But later, she will apply a poultice of crushed leaves to a wound, a treatment that doesn't just fight infection, but promotes a specific bacterial balance on the skin. She is operating two systems at once. One, a blunt global shield against the historic invaders that broke her ancestors. The other, a precise local tool to maintain a relationship with her immediate environment. She is building a hybrid defense. Or look at the community elders. They fight for land rights, not just for cultural or spiritual reasons, but with a stark biological argument. To be displaced from their territory is not just a loss of home. It is a severing from the specific microbiome, the plants, soils, rivers, animals, that their bodies are still fundamentally tuned to. Moving them is a medical catastrophe waiting to happen. Their land is their pharmacy, their immunization record, their biological map. To take it is to induce a form of systemic shock. This is the modern survival strategy. A conscious, deliberate, and often politically charged effort to curate a new balance. It's no longer automatic. It's a choice, a fight. They must now actively select which parts of the globalized world to let in and which to keep out. Which vaccines to accept, which foods to eat, which medicines to use, and when to rely on the old ways. The cost of this new battle is psychological, cultural, and constant. The exhaustion is no longer just from walking 20 kilometers through dense undergrowth. It's the mental load of navigating two conflicting worlds of knowledge. The pain is the grief of lost generations, the trauma of near extinction woven into their collective memory. The where is in every decision that weighs the immediate benefit of modern medicine against the long-term erosion of their own sophisticated, embodied science. The ultimate insight is this: their original survival was a masterpiece of passive adaptation. What we are witnessing now is something perhaps more profound: an active, conscious evolution. They are demonstrating that resilience isn't about returning to a pure past. It's about the brutal, intelligent work of assembling a new coherence from the pieces of a broken world. They are teaching us that immunity isn't just something you have, it's something you do. A practice, a relationship. For them, it was a relationship with the jungle. For us, in our globalized urban jungles of concrete and artificial environments, what is our relationship with the microbial world? We sterilize, we sanitize, we isolate, we create our own closed loops, and then panic when a novel virus breaches them. We've chosen the opposite path, and we are arguably more vulnerable than ever to the next biological asteroid. Their story reframes survival. It's not the triumph of the strongest, but the wisdom of the most integrated. It wasn't about conquering nature, but about achieving a state of dynamic, informed truce. Their tragedy was that the truce was violated from the outside. Their ongoing struggle is to write a new one, on their own terms, with the full, painful knowledge of how fragile such treaties can be. They looked into the heart of the jungle's deadliest weapon and saw not an enemy to destroy, but a force to be understood, mapped, and lived with. That perspective, that deep strategic humility in the face of nature's complexity, may be their most vital legacy, not just for surviving the Amazon, but for navigating the increasingly volatile biological century we all now face. What if our own survival depends less on building higher walls and more on learning to read the invisible landscape around us? To map our own microbes, understand our own trades with the environment? The jungle tribes held a map to a world we've only just begun to see. A world that is, ultimately, inside all of us. The story continues, not in isolation, but in a fragile, watchful integration. Watch them. Listen. The next chapter of human resilience is being written right now in the fractured equilibrium of the Amazon.